offensive player in a couple of different staffs. How do you kind of go about it when spring practice starts, or even when the offseason starts back in January?
I think if you're doing it the right way, you start with identity and talking about what your identity is. You know, every person has an identity. We're all individual creations, and we all have different personalities and different physical characteristics, and a group should be the same way. A business, excuse me, a church, and a football team, and certainly an offense. And so spend a good bit of time talking about identity and building culture, and as we're doing that, we start introducing the early pieces of the offense, you know, and it starts with the most basic things. You know, how are we going to huddle? How are we going to break the huddle? What do our formations look like? How do we call personnel groups? And then you start with a few plays, and then you just add more plays until you get to the point where you've got it all in. And so it's a day-by-day process. And the thing that I've told a lot of people and will continue to repeat is just how impressed I've been with our players' eagerness to learn something totally new. Because when you do it like this, it's like learning a new language. And then on top of that, you have new skills to perform. And so it'd be like if somebody came into any place of business and said, okay, we're getting rid of all of the training manuals and all the stuff that we've used to determine how we go about our day-to-day business, and we're starting over. And so all that terminology, that verbiage is new, but then also on top of that, how we go do our jobs is completely new. So if you're comparing it to a sales team, how we're going to go about selling is going to be different than the way you've done it before. And so when I say their eagerness and willingness to learn, I think that's something that's significant, because how fast and how well they learn is going to be based on what's inside of them and their desire to do something. And so I've been really pleased with that.
You talk about identity. What do you see as the identity for this offense? Like what you want it to be anyway?
Yeah, you know, I think it's what Wisconsin is. It's who Luke Fickell is, you know, and we talk all the time about, as a team, about being tough, nasty, and disciplined. And, you know, Wisconsin has won a lot of football games over the years with that mentality, and being gritty and being physical is who we are. And it doesn't just mean, all right, we're going to run the football. That grittiness, that toughness applies to a receiver who's catching a contested slant when he's running towards the middle of the field, and he's got to make that catch, and he's got a corner draped all over his back, and then he's got a linebacker running out to make contact as soon as he touches the football. That's toughness, to make that catch. One of the toughest things in football. It's the quarterback getting hit and popping up. All those things are a part of what's at our core, and I think we're building that.
How much of the offense right now have you been able to install, and do you feel you're on schedule or ahead of schedule?
I would say, yeah, it's a good question. I think we're a little bit ahead of schedule of what I've been able to do at other places at this time, and I would say we're probably at about 90-95% of the offense installed.
You've seen Dylan Jones get a lot of work with that first team offense. What has he shown you in the time that you've been here that kind of made him stand out in that running back room?
Yeah, he runs with that style that I'm talking about. He runs tough, he runs aggressive, and he's decisive, you know, and that's one of the biggest things with a runner. You know, runners sometimes can be effective when they want to stop their feet and try to make a guy miss, but the time to do that is not when you're in the A gap and you have people who are fighting to make their blocks. The time to do that is when you're in the open field. And so his willingness to stick his foot in the ground and make a vertical cut, get north and south, and run through would-be tacklers is the thing that sticks out to me more than anything.
Coach, can you talk a little bit about just the depth in the receiver room? We've seen a lot of different guys with Ballard. Henry's looked really good, plus some returning pieces in Vinny. How does that room look like to you?
Yeah, their depth, competition is I think the theme that's been the case this entire spring. And so a lot of guys have gotten a lot of reps, which is great. I think competition makes almost everyone better. There are a few guys sometimes who shrink away from the competition, and that's good for us to find out as well. But I think we're going to have a group where we're going to play a good number of guys, and we're still in the midst of that evaluation in terms of trying to decide who are going to be the go-to guys and who are role players, and then who are the backups.
What have you learned? Like I said, what in terms of Billy Edwards, what have you learned? You know, seeing him out here in this spring practice setting that maybe you weren't aware of, even just from the months working up to spring practice.
Everything is kind of what I thought it would be with him, and maybe just a little bit more. The people that I talked to before we offered him, and the conversations I had getting to know him, everything led me to believe that he was going to be a smart, tough, competitive kid who was going to do everything that he could to be successful and be a leader, and he's been all of that. His preparation, I would say, is well above what most college quarterbacks are. He just is what he does before he shows up is significant in terms of getting ready for practice from a physical, mental, emotional standpoint. He shows up ready to go every day.
Like any examples of that, or just how has he kind of distinguished himself in terms of that preparation?
Well, I used the word early when I was just talking about our offense, eager or willing, and he's the guy who's asking me 2 days ahead of time, hey, when are we going to get the install for Thursday on a Tuesday morning? When are we going to get the script so I know which plays I'll be running ahead of time? Hey, coach, on this play right here, is this guy's split accurate? Or he'll text me and say, hey, this play that happened yesterday, is that how it was supposed to happen?
Who else is establishing themselves as a leader in the offense?
That's a great question, and one of the things that we really identified early that we thought would be really important. Certainly Billy, I would say, is at the top of the list. I would also say Danny O'Neil is a natural leader. He sort of has the personality, charisma that draws other people towards him. He has the ability to bring others along with him. I would say in the offensive line, those top three guys that have had a good bit of reps, Brunner, Renfro, and Malman, all three of those guys. The thing that's interesting with those guys, what I've seen is, some days I'll feel Jake Renfro a little bit more. Some days I hear Riley a little more. Last practice, it was Rip, Joe Brunner. I just felt him at every turn, shouting, encouraging guys, even when he's not in the huddle. So those guys for sure. I think at different times, some of the receivers have been that guy. But I think those guys have been the main ones that stick out to me so far.
Jeff, the tight end is so important in your offense, and you're one of the few coaches left as an OC that uses 12 as much as you do. What have you thought about that room and how some of those guys have developed, maybe like a Steck or even Ashcraft?
Making progress. That position is one of the most difficult positions to just to learn in this offense, but also to just get to the point where they're able to excel at their jobs. And it's for two reasons. One, just the different things that we ask them to do. I mean, they're lining up all over the place, and so they have to know where to line up, just like any receiver or running back would, as well as your traditional tight end alignments. And then their job responsibilities are larger. Just the volume of skills that we're asking from them is really high. They've got to be able to run block like an offensive tackle. They've also got to be able to run block like a receiver does, which is an undervalued thing and a completely different skill. And then they've got to be able at times to pass protect, particularly in our play action game. And then they got to be able to hopefully run routes like a receiver would when we do extend them out there. So there's a lot to do right there, and I think they're making good progress.
Coach, when it comes to players in space, we've seen a lot be receivers and running backs. What is the value of those opportunities in your offense?
Yeah, I think there'll be plenty of those, I think, for everybody involved, and that's really kind of the name of the game, to create space for a guy who can make a play either with his speed or ability to make someone miss, or for some guys it's being strong enough to run through a tackle. But you're talking about explosive plays and finding a guy who can do that. And I think it's finding ways that you can put those guys in those positions But then the other thing is not just putting a guy in space, but putting a guy in position where he can win. And so it might not be that much space, but it might be throwing a 50-50 ball to a guy who's in one-on-one coverage, a guy who can make that play. But the bottom line, I think what you're referring to is just creating explosive plays, and it can be done, as you're referring to, just getting a running back out matched up on a linebacker that can't really cover him, throwing a quick screen to a receiver, or throwing it down the field. And every day we're trying to find ways to do that and get our best players on a guy who's not quite as good as them.
You asked about Dylan before, but I guess I'm wondering with that running back group, particularly with Darian and Cade, do you see those guys as kind of being similar, or do you think they're all kind of bringing different characteristics to the table that you might get them
good question.
roles?
Good question. I think they're all similar enough that we could do anything with any of them. I've been on some teams where we had a running back who was a big guy and a bruiser, and you wanted to run the football with him, and in some cases maybe ask him to block, but he wasn't the guy that you're going to motion out and run an option route with necessarily. Maybe he doesn't have that kind of route running ability or doesn't have great hands. Or I've been on teams where you had a running back that was a big guy that ran well between the tackles but wasn't great out on the edge, and then you had a smaller guy who was just the opposite of that, and so you had to play different styles with different types of backs. I think all three of those guys are capable of doing anything in the offense, so that's good. That makes my job easier, and it makes Coach Spalding's job easier because we can rotate those guys and keep them all fresh without having to specialize by play type. But I think there are subtle differences with each guy, and I think those things are beginning to expose themselves. But just like the receivers, they're still in competition phase to sort of evaluate which of those guys does some of those subtle things a little better.
Yeah, Chef, you guys have had some injuries in your room this spring. The running back room had some injuries. Are you comfortable going into next year with just the personnel that you guys think?
Yeah, I don't think any of the injuries that we've had are anything that's going to be long-term issues, and so I think we're in a good spot.
I mean, just like some of the those guys during the season now, just a couple of some guys being concerned.
Yeah, I would say as a coach, you always got to be concerned about having enough guys at all positions, and I think we're at that spot like we are at a couple of other spots. I think we have enough right now, but if there was the right guy at the right time that we felt like could add to our team, certainly we would look at that.
Coach, I know it's very early, but early impressions, Carter Smith?
Really raw and really talented. I could give you more, but that's really what he is. He is a guy who needs to learn how to really play the position. But in terms of his ability to run and throw on the run, really high, and I like him a lot. And so I think we're gonna have somebody that we're really gonna like there.
Jeff, we've heard from Coach Fickle and Coach Dressel this idea of like too many guys on this team maybe had that feeling of like once one bad thing happened and it snowballed, and that's part of what led to the lack of success. When you come in from the outside and get maybe some fresh eyes on it, do you get a sense that guys maybe had that mentality, and maybe how can we go about breaking that as a team?
Good question. I think that's always an issue with a team or a unit, offense, defense, whatever, until you've actually done it and been through some of those moments. I think the only way, and this is true in life, that we learn to rise through challenges is recognizing that we have to embrace those challenges, and those challenges are really opportunities in disguise. And I think we've had some moments as an offense where we've seen our defense sort of gain some momentum in a practice, and we've lost a little bit of our edge. And then I think we've had some moments where we've been able to work through those times as well. And so that's what spring ball is for. Not only evaluation of talent, teaching them the offense, but even more importantly, them learning how to play with confidence all the time, no matter the circumstances.
Coach, Danny's a guy who's in a unique situation, having starting experience as a freshman. What's kind of stood out about him entering your room and what he's shown so far this spring?
Yeah, I think what I said about him earlier is the thing that stands out. Just his personality, his charisma. He's got confidence. He steps in the huddle, and you feel his presence. he's got a good vibe, he's got upbeat energy, and I think guys generally feed off of that. And you know, he's continued to learn the offense and improve as a thrower and operator as well. But really, that would be the biggest thing.
Anything else here for